Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. And we're doing this chronologically, going through the four Gospels. And today we're in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we are looking at Jesus predicting his death for the first time. And so I'm going to go through, summarize again out of Matthew. For those who haven't been watching, I like to try to stay in Matthew for the most part. I just like the way he writes, unless it's just not in Matthew. So, but we're looking here. We just got done yesterday looking at Peter confessing that Jesus is Lord. Right? He is the Messiah, the Son of God. And so after this, it goes into verse 21. It says, "From then on, Jesus began to tell his disciples plainly that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem and that he would suffer many terrible things at the hands of the elders, the lead priests, and the religious leaders of the law, that he would be killed but then on the third day that he would be raised from the dead." And so he's telling them this, it's like, what? And so Peter, right? Peter doesn't like reprimand him in front of everyone. He takes him to the side and begins to get on to God, right? Or to Jesus, right? And he said, "Heaven forbid, Lord," he said, "this will never happen to you." Right? Now think about that for a minute. Think about what Peter's saying. Now Peter doesn't understand it, and so this is Jesus' response. He turned to Peter and he said, "Get away from me, Satan." Some versions, translations say, "Get behind me, Satan." So the man who just called, Peter, who just called Jesus, that told Jesus that he was the Messiah, right, the Son of God, is now being called Satan and being told to get behind Jesus. He says, You are a dangerous trap to me. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God." And then Jesus said to all the disciples, right? He turns to them, he says, "If you want to be my followers, you must give up your way, take up your cross." Again, we've talked about this before. He's mentioned this before and what it meant to take up your cross. We'll go into the details about that. "And follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you're going to save it." And what it says, "What do you benefit if you gain the whole world?" Right? You gain everything, but lose your own soul. "Is anything worth more than your soul?" He said, "For the Son of Man will come with his angels in the glory of his Father and will judge all people according to their deeds." And he finishes verse 28 by saying this, and we'll look in this with detail as well. "And I tell you the truth, some standing here right now will not die before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." And so let's go through this, right? We see in verse 21, "From then on," right? So from then on, right, what that does is it marks a turning point. It marks a turning point in the mission. We talked about that a little bit yesterday about how, right, this him, them confessing, going deeper into who he was really a turning point, and this really started to do it. And in the announcement, all right, it signals the announcement of the kingdom of heaven. There's a new emphasis here, right, on his death and his resurrection. He hadn't really talked about that any, right? He hadn't really gone into that, and they didn't understand what he was talking about with this. And so the disciples didn't really grasp it. They didn't understand what he was talking about and understand his true purpose, because they still had all these preconceived notions of the Messiah coming, right? He was going to become a conqueror. He was like, going to be a knight on a white horse, and he was going to, have a huge army. He was going to throw Rome out and then reestablish Israel and all that stuff. And so they just didn't understand. So this is also right here. This is the first of three times that Jesus predicts his death. We see it in Matthew 17 and in Matthew 20, and there's some others, right, that this in the Gospels. But these are the three times that he did. And so Peter, right, being Jesus' friend and a devoted follower, right, and I think this is why I like Peter, because I can put myself in his shoes, right? If a good friend of mine saying, "Hey man, I've got to go to the city and I'm going to be persecuted, I'm going to be killed," I'm like, "Hey man, we probably shouldn't go there. Let's go somewhere else." Yeah. And so Peter didn't get it, and so that's what he was doing, right? He was just he was trying to protect Jesus from suffering and pain. But here's the thing: if Jesus hadn't done what he done, if he hadn't died, then Peter himself would have died in his sins. There would have been no hope for Peter, and there'd be no hope for all of us. So if Peter was successful at doing what he was doing, then, or convincing Jesus that he wasn't to die, then all of us would be lost. And so that's why you see this great reaction from Jesus calling him Satan. And it talks, you know, it kind of points to the fact that great temptations can actually come from those who love us and seek to protect us. And so we've got to be careful sometimes. We've got to be cautious of the advice that we take from friends who would say, "Oh, surely God doesn't want you to face this." Maybe he does. And so, you know, and sometimes that's unfortunate. The Bible talks about the suffering that, you know, we will have. There will be suffering. And but that we are to lean on God in our suffering. And so, you know, when we have these, you know, we have some of these temptations, and they can actually come from those who are trying to protect us and from discomfort. This is what Peter was trying to do. Peter had good intentions. He was trying to protect Jesus, but what he was doing was the work of Satan. And so we've got to be very careful with how we do stuff and how we do things. We see this in the wilderness temptation, right? Jesus heard the message that he could achieve his greatness, right? He could become great without dying. And and we hear the same message from Peter. And so that again, that's you know, we that's why Jesus called him Satan, because he whether he realized it or not, he was doing the work of Satan. And so we talked about Peter had just recognized Jesus as the Messiah, right? But it just didn't take him very long to forsake that, right? And go around and say, hey, oh, I'm instead of going with God's work, I'm going to go from a human perspective. And so we've got to be careful, because Satan is always trying to get us to leave God out of the picture. And so Jesus rebuked Peter for his attitude. And so, again, to be fair to Peter, he didn't understand it yet. He was just protecting his friend, but Jesus was helping him understand how important and how important it was for him to go to Jerusalem and to die. And so that helps him there. And so then he goes and he talks about, you know, pick up your cross. You're going to have to carry your cross and follow me. And when Jesus used this picture of them taking a cross and following him, the disciples knew what that meant, right? When you took up a cross, you were going to die. Crucifixion was the common Roman method of execution, and condemned criminals, they had to carry their own cross. And so when you saw someone carrying a cross through the streets, you know they were going to die. That was a dead. We say it now, a dead man walking, right? We see that with executioner and stuff, you know, dead men walking, and that's what they were. That's what they were. And so what he's saying here is that following Jesus is meant to be a true commitment. There could be the risk of death. Back then there was surely the risk of death, and there's no turning back, right? Once you start carrying that cross, you can't halfway through it be like, hey, you know what? I decided I don't want to be crucified. No. Once you start carrying a cross, you're carrying a cross to the end. You're committed. There's no turning back from that. You don't have a choice. And so that's what we have to make sure that if we're going to pick up that cross, that we're committed to what we're doing here. And so the possibility of losing their lives was very real for the disciples. It's not real for us as much, real, right? You know, I mean, I live in small town Georgia, right? And so I don't have to worry about my life so much, you know, and being persecuted for preaching for Jesus in the Bible Belt. It's just, you know, there might be some people who disagree with me. They're going to go along their way. I don't really have to worry about them killing me for it, right? But this was a real possibility for the disciples in this day. And so we see that we see that throughout the New Testament, that several of them were killed. And if you look at the historical record of what was recorded of how the apostles died, most of them were crucified or killed in horrible ways. And so the real discipleship implies a real commitment, not, you know, and I'll be honest with you, not a lot of what we see today, right? It was a true commitment to Christ. Our whole existence was to be committed to serving God. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not there. Like, and I need to do a better job. And I think in Christian, we you know, sometimes I think the lack of persecution has made us complacent. It made religion easy, made being a Christian easy when it's not supposed to be. And so we've got to work at getting rid of that. And so, you know, if we try to save our physical life from death, pain, and suffering and discomfort, then we risk losing the eternal life, right? And so we got to be careful with that, right? And now I know it's not easy. It's like, well, Chad, I don't want to suffer. No one does. But the fact is if you read the New Testament, you read the teachings of Jesus, of the apostles, Like suffering's part of what comes along with being a Christian. It's part of it. Like, there's a lot of people out there that teach like a prosperity type theology of well, if you come to Jesus, then everything's going to be wonderful and rosy, and everything's going to cash is just going to come in your way, and everything. And that's not anywhere. You're going to be blessed, right? Even if you lose everything and it's all you have is God, you're still blessed. You're still richer than anyone else with $1 million. But it's hard to see that. And so we've got to make sure that we understand that following Christ isn't going to be easy. And it's going to be hard, and you could be persecuted for it to the point where you might have to risk your life for it. And that's what we have to understand, the commitment level that we have to Christ. So if we protect ourselves, right, from the pain God calls us to suffer, we begin to die spiritually and emotionally. And I think sometimes, honestly, again, I'm not trying to be harsh, but I think that's why the church in America sometimes has all the problems that it has. And we see, right? If you go back and look at the New Testament church, they didn't have time for that. They didn't have time for a lot of the problems because they, not to say they didn't. I mean, like, shoot, Paul wrote for Corinthians all about some of the major problems they were having. But it wasn't, a lot of it wasn't out of complacency. It was out of just sinfulness and things like that. And so we've got to, commit and do that. And so we got to make sure we don't try to protect ourselves from the suffering that we're called to. And I know that seems hard. It seems counterintuitive, right? Our lives turn inward, right? And we lose our intended purpose when we're not doing that. When we give our lives in service to Christ, however, we discover the real purpose of living. I don't think I'm there yet. I hope I get there 100% one day, but I feel like I am getting there. And so finally, he finishes off verse 28, right? Where he talks about some of you will still be alive when you see the kingdom of heaven coming. And so because all the disciples have died before, well, they've died before Christ's return. Now, I will say that, I'll throw it out there, that there are some people who still believe that some of the apostles and disciples are still alive. It's a minority of people who believe this, but I just don't believe that this falls along. I think we would know if Apostle Paul was still with us, or Matthew, Mark, and some of these people that were following Christ. And so there, if we look at this, it's like, okay, what did Jesus mean when he says that some of you will still be here whenever you see the kingdom coming in all its glory? Now, some believe that it was the transfiguration, right? In Matthew 17, we're gonna get to that, right? When Peter, James, and John saw his glory. I don't really think that falls, because that was very shortly after he said that. Others say, right, it refers to his resurrection and the ascension. So some people believe that. Now, that could be it. That could be the seeing the glory of God, or of his kingdom, being the resurrected Christ and stuff like that. While others, and this is where I fall in line with on this belief, others believe that Pentecost, that we see in Acts 2, that was the beginning of the church. The beginning of the church, I'm sorry, being fulfilled, Jesus' words. And so the very act of the church coming into existence, right? We see in Acts 2, like, just thousands of people are baptized. The whole church just kicks off. And so that was the glory of the kingdom being established, or coming in all of its glory. I tend to lean toward that one. I can get the resurrection, seeing the resurrection. That could be part of it too. Maybe a combination of both. But again, it's one of those things that it for us, it doesn't really matter. It's not something I would spend a lot of time arguing, or spend a ton of time on. It's a good thing, an interesting thing to look into and wonder about. But I definitely don't fall in line with the people who think that some of them are still alive to this day, right? They would still be alive whenever Jesus returned. I don't think that. There's nothing that points that at all, that would be logical. So again, so you see that. So just to summarize all this up, right? Jesus is letting them know, right? Okay, Peter's confessed that Jesus is Lord, that he's the Messiah. And so at that point, there's a turning point, and Peter, or Jesus, starts saying, look, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to have to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be persecuted. I'm going to be killed. And then I'm going to rise on the third day. And it was like the disciples heard the first part of that and just completely ignored the rising on the third day part. Like, they're like, no, you can't allow that to happen. And so They just didn't get it yet. And so he has to correct them. He has to correct Peter, and he has to let them know, hey, look, if you're going to continue to follow me, you're going to have to be willing to take up your cross, and you're going to follow me. And that applies to us too. It doesn't just apply to the apostles, right? It doesn't just apply to some of our more committed members or deacons or elders or pastors, right? Or ministers, preachers. It doesn't just apply to them. It applies to all of us as Christians. We're taking up a cross. We are to take up the ministry of Jesus, and part of that ministry was taking up a cross and going to, spreading his message and going into it. And so we have to be willing to take up that same cross and good. Now, luckily, we don't have to we don't have to take on all the sins, right? Jesus took on our sins. He took care of all that for us. But we still have to be fully committed to following Jesus, just as he was committed to his mission. And when we see things like Peter getting in the way of fulfilling our missions, we need to make sure we tell those people sometimes, hey, you're going to have to get behind me. You're going to have to get behind me because I'm on a mission from God. And no, we're not the Blues Brothers. Sorry. But we are. We are on a mission from God. Right? We are called to do his will, we're called to spread his message, and we need to make sure that those things that are getting in that way, that we put those things behind us. As always, I appreciate everyone who watches these. I hope that it's been helpful. I hope it's insightful. If it is, please share it. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do so. We will continue to try to put out lessons and go through, as we go through this reading, we're going to dive into some deeper stuff, like hard questions, things people are dealing with in their lives, and see, use the Bible to speak to and answer those things. As always, I appreciate everyone who's watching.